things that got me interested in the television series Game of Thrones, aside from titties, was the dragons. Ever since I was a little boy, I was obsessed with two things: dragons and werewolves. The dragons obviously are a part of this story, and in this video, continuing with my theme of mostly doing content related to the up-and-coming series House of the Dragon, I'm going to discuss the actual creation of dragons. In A Song of Ice and Fire, in this world that George R. R. Martin has created, the actual creation of dragons is still a bit of a mystery and something that's, much like everything with the origins in this world, up for debate. Now, before we get started on this video, please do me a massive favor and slap a like on it. This like goal is going to be 420. Also, make sure you're subscribed, and this is the most important part. Make sure you have your notifications turned on, so that way you'll get an alert every single time I drop a Game of Thrones video throughout this long night. Now, jumping right into things, just as a bit of a briefer, for those who are unaware, dragons are neither male nor female. Well, okay, sometimes they're male, sometimes they're female, but according to the historians, dragons can change their gender like a flame can change direction. And according to history, the only true way of determining whether a dragon was male or female was if a dragon laid eggs, it was considered to be a woman, and if a dragon never laid eggs, well, then they considered it male. Alright, now to get a little bit deeper, dragons are originally found by a race of these people called the Valyrians, which everyone I'm sure is aware of. Daenerys and Jon Snow on the television series are the last of these really in this world that we know have direct lineage to the Targaryens that ruled Westeros to begin with. But they start out as sort of like humble shepherds and herders, and then in the continent of Essos, which is across from Westeros, they discover dragons in something called the 14 Flames, or basically this ring of volcanoes that is, I'm pretty sure, has an intense heat to the area, which probably likely helps to hatch these dragon eggs. We do know that blood magic is involved, and that typically requires a sacrifice. But one of the things we know for certain is that intense heat and flames are also involved. This is why a lot of the Maesters think that Dragonstone is the perfect place to hatch dragon eggs, and some of them even think that if you take a dragon egg too far away from it, it will never hatch. After a while, if a dragon egg has never been hatched, then it, of course, fossilizes. And Daenerys, at the beginning of our story, was given 3 fossilized dragon eggs, and just to show you how, important and valuable those are, Jorah tells her that one of those dragon eggs could buy her a ship and a small army to go and try to conquer Westeros. Now, what's interesting is that when starting this story, or when creating this universe, George actually wanted to set the Valyrians apart, and in doing so, he gave them, traditional pale hair and purple eyes, which are like high fantasy typical features of like elves. But he entertained the idea of, instead of actually having dragons, he wanted to give the Targaryens or the Valyrians some sort of pyrokinetic ability, like basically telekinesis involving fire. Like they could somehow use their natural given magic to manipulate fire, and this is how they conquered and had an entire civilization over in Essos, which eventually conquered Westeros. Now, that's clearly not what he decided to do, and he wanted to give them actual dragons. And the way they control dragons is something that's lost up to mystery. Now, I personally think that what we were given, just briefly, I've mentioned this in several videos before, but what we were given information on Arya Targaryen and fireworms and what happened with her when she flew off on the back of Balerion the Dread and sort of disappeared into Valyria, when they return, she is infested with fireworms, and this led Septon Barth to believe that dragons were actually created from Valyrians who would use blood magic to manipulate, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, a fireworm and a wyvern. Now, to just sort of quickly go through what a fireworm is, they're worm-like creatures that look very similar to dragons, but they do not have any ability to fly. However, they do possess the ability to breed dragons. When the Valyrians first encountered these creatures, it was in their mines, and they would often find like charred corpses of slaves that had encountered them, and they knew knew that a fireworm was responsible for these charred corpses and like burning their slaves, because there would always be like giant cracks and holes in the rocks, and fireworms actually possess the ability to carve straight through rocks. Now, wyverns, on the other hand, at least in George's universe, look very similar to the dragons, except for they do not possess one key trait. That's the fire breathing. A lot of them tend to be fairly smaller than dragons, but some of the wyverns are so much smaller they hunt in packs of like 100 or more, and they're like some of the most deadly wyverns. So in conclusion, Septon Barth believes that the ancient Valyrians used a combination of wyvern stock, fireworm stock, and blood magic to create what we now know as dragons. And as sort of evidence of this, a lot of people, or a lot of the historians, cite that the fireworms were present in Valyria before the actual dragons, even though there are some scholars from Asshai that argue that the Valyrians took the dragons from Asshai and turned them into slaves and manipulated them into mass weapons of war. Everything, like I mentioned, as far as related to origins in this universe, can always be debated, because George didn't write it as like a solidified history. He wrote it more accurately to real world history, which is you have to take into account from everyone who was alive during that time frame, and take all their points of views and sort of put it together, and then sort of like determine from yourself which is true. Like most information, the actual like ability or the reasoning behind the Targaryens and the Valyrians' ability to control dragons is sort of lost to history. But one thing the Targaryens in particular know, that if they mate with each other, which are particular like fathers marries daughters, uncles and nieces, cousins, aunts and nephews, since they marry so much in the family, that's how they know for certain, will continue to control dragons. The ability is passed down in their genes, which is like a major point in this story, is that bloodlines are essential and key to ruling Westeros. The same can be said with controlling dragons. Now, we are getting towards the end of this video, and one thing I want to mention before I wrap it up is the color of dragons. They are described as beautiful, insanely intense colors, and that's something that I look forward to seeing in this up-and-coming House of the Dragon. But there's really not much information that we know about how a dragon's color reflects its personality. Like, we know for certain that black dragons, for the most part, Drogon and Balerion, tend to be in Cannibal, I believe, was a black dragon as well, but they tend to be the largest when they're born in clutches of like several eggs at a time. Black dragons tend to be the most ferocious, the largest, and usually tend to grow the quickest in size. Another thing we know is that red dragons tend to be the most vicious, or the most ferocious of fighters. And there's one person in particular in the House of the Dragon, in the up-and-coming Game of Thrones spin-off series, sorry, I feel like I have to say that it's like trademarked or something, but Daemon Targaryen rides Caraxes, who is a red dragon, also known as Bloodworm. Now, the reason why I mentioned Caraxes' red color and like what we know about them being ferocious is that Caraxes died taking out a dragon that was a lot larger than he was. It happened in the Battle Above the God's Eye, which is something that I mentioned before, but basically Prince Daemon Targaryen fights Prince Aemon One-Eye Targaryen, and Prince Aemon, being on Vhagar, the larger dragon, sort of like claws at the belly of Caraxes and tears off one of his wings, but Caraxes, being such a badass, vicious dragon, he's able to rip the throat out of a dragon larger than him. Vhagar, he rips her throat out as they land in the water. They all die, but red dragons are known to be ferocious, black dragons are known to be the largest and to grow the fastest, and just to be the most powerful overall. I'm super curious to see where this show House of the Dragon is going to play, since we know that there are multiple dragons that are alive during, at least in the beginning of the show. I want to see how they attribute dragons' colors to their personality. It's kind of a thing in the Game of Thrones television series, and way more of a thing in the books, but I just want to see this new series expand upon that. You all let me know what you think down below in the comment section. Alright, well, I feel like that's a good spot to wrap this video up without taking up too much of y'all's time. Please, if you could, slap a like on this video. The like goal is indeed 420. Also, this is the most important part. Make sure you're subscribed and make sure you have your notifications turned on, so that way you'll get alerted as soon as I drop a video throughout this long night. I've been getting a few people telling me that they're not actually getting their notifications from YouTube for whatever reason. So just go ahead and double click and make sure you tap that bell to make sure the notifications are turned on. A super special thank you to every single person watching this video, and a super special shout out to Brick23, Bloody Tyrant, Leah Hendrickson, Angie Delehanty, Nancy, Tockstein, Marilyn Miller, Fred Wicks, BEL-a-Donna, Cater Tot, Joe Swag, and Damon Mayo. They are all members of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. And if you are watching or interested in joining, check out the link that's popped off during this video or one of the links down below in the description. I want to thank you all again so much for watching. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunt's Reviews.